until the South Bank bought theirs. And I mentioned earlier going down in the minibus to this wonderful all-night wayang when the South Bank Gamelan arrived, and it came with musicians and dalang and as an inaugural thing, and it was a gift from the Indonesian government to the South Bank Centre. And so there was this inaugural wayang that was in the People's Palace space, which is now the Skylon restaurant. So in the South Bank Centre, but this huge long room. And we all came down, and it was our first wayang, and we did play a wayang because the then ambassador was a dalang, and he came to York and did a wayang with us, and that was fantastic. But it was a short wayang. But learning that was a big challenge, and it was the first time that we really had to learn to take cues from a drum, in the sense of actually having to jump out of one piece and into another piece, and that was a really extraordinary insight into what the music was really about, compared to the sort of learning a piece, that sort of approach that we'd been taking up to then. So that was a big thing, and that must have been in 1986 or somewhere around there, or 85, 06 probably. So that was a big thing. And then York Gamelan, because there was no South Bank, it did lots of sort of media gigs and things like that. We were quite an active group. We went to we did Music Time, which was a show for schools, and we did Number 73, which was a Saturday morning show with Michaela Strachan. That was on the bus route. It was. It was based on a house, which was Number 73, and it would start. You would ring the doorbell and go in, and we ran through this house set, waving mallets in the air, and threw our shoes into the corner of the room and sat down and played Gangsteran. I imagine we played Gangsteran. And then we did Midweek with Libby Purvis, where we were compared to a sounding like a small factory by what's his name? That awful jazz singer who was quite into surrealism and things. George Melly. Right. George Melly described us as a small factory, and that is where. And I told this story when I was being interviewed outside, and I think Pooja wants me to tell it again. That was where Neil announced to the British public that he had smuggled the York Gamelan in diplomatic bags into the country. And in this innocuous interview with Libby Purvis, he announced this. And the next morning, he got a phone call from the Inland Revenue saying, "You owe us big time." And I'm not quite sure how that was resolved. It was resolved, but a dramatic moment. Have you got enough light? So, yes, Number 73 was very odd. Saturday morning show, and I guess we probably played one piece, and then we had to do this thing at the end where there was something called the Duster Muster, which we had to read out this poem very quickly that we were expected to know, but none of us had watched the show, so we had no idea what we were meant to be doing, so it was complete chaos. Sort of 20 people going, Duster Muster! It was great fun. I'm probably knocking this and making a terrible noise on the mic. I can hear Jerome. I was talking about the different times that we appeared on television as the York Gamelan and various radio shows and things, because that was, and then we stopped doing that because the South Bank started to do things like Blue Peter and things. And that was, and they sort of stole our limelight a bit. I mean, I sort of left around that time as well, but I think it was a bit of a blow for the York Gamelan, actually, because they'd been the star gamelan. They'd been the ones that were visible, and we played at the Edinburgh Festival, or we certainly played in Edinburgh. I'm not sure if it was at the festival. We played at the Cheltenham Festival. We played, we were the touring gamelan at York. And then when the South Bank programme took off, it sort of, which was wonderful. But I think for a while there was a sort of slight frustration in York that all their gigs had gone. That was my perception of it anyway. I think they're doing quite a lot now again. I think they're fairly active again. But what happened in London was extraordinary, the way that because what really happened was the Dharma Siswa, was because people like John Pawson went and Pete Smith went and came back knowing, you know, so much. Because I remember, I don't really want to sort of, but there are, scandal. No, it's not really scandal, but there was for example, Chiblon. Nobody knew how to play Chiblon in York. Neil didn't play Chiblon. And it was sort of presented to us as this sort of rather mythological thing that we would never achieve. There was this sort of sense that this was just kind of a little bit out of our league. And that there was... And I think Neil is somebody who likes the mystery of the other culture, I think, a bit. And so there was a sort of sense that we felt that we were always going to be not as good as a real Javanese gamelan. And these people who came back from the Dharmasiswa, they kind of exploded that myth a bit. I mean, in a sense, they aren't quite as good. Even now, the South Bank players are not as good as a Javanese group. But they're damn close. The only thing really that I think gives it away to my ears, certainly, is the singing. I think that's where the problems still lie. But they're damn close, and I think it's... But it kind of took a particular set of personalities to explode the myth that we were just sort of... I think what we felt we were doing was learning about another culture by playing their music. Whereas what people like Pete and John are about is playing the music and doing the music justice. And that's a different attitude, because it's not an attitude about learning, it's an attitude about performing, and it's an attitude about being the best that you can be at something. And that really only appeared, I think, with the South Bank players. And
how about Lila Cita? Do you think
I think we have that now as well. I think when we went to Bali, that's where that happened to us. I mean, I think one of the things there is that most of the players of Lila Cita had come out of the South Bank players or out of the South Bank programme. So they already had that predisposition to think that they could learn anything. But I think it was going to Bali that really injected something of the, actually this is what it's like. Because it was a bit like this thing I was talking about before about the attitude to notation and things, that there was a sense before Bali of well, like for example, dynamics and earplugs. There were people in the group who would say we should wear earplugs so that we can play loud. And there were people in the group who would say earplugs are no use, they just make you play louder. And that somehow I think that now we go, okay, this music is meant to be loud, so we will wear earplugs. If those of us who feel it's too loud will wear earplugs, and then we'll play it at the right volume. Whereas there was a sense before Bali that half the group would say, well, why don't we just practice it more quietly? And it was only actually being in Bali where we realised actually that that's not an option. That's just not the music. The music is not quiet music. You can't practice it quietly. If you practice it quietly, you won't be able to perform it right. So those changes, I think, have happened. And so I think Lila Cita is much more about the performance now. But there are still things about our visual presentation and things that we feel. I think there's an underlying, and I'm quite as guilty of this attitude as anybody, possibly more guilty in some ways, that there's something where, I mean, again, the costumes, there was quite a reluctance to wear traditional costume. And I think it's because we felt actually the costume isn't part of the music. The costume is separate. And the costume is, and we don't want to impersonate Balinese, so we don't want to wear the costume. Whereas actually perhaps the costume is part of the music. And perhaps it's taken our trip to Bali for us to realise that the costume is actually part of it, and that we're not doing it properly unless we wear the costume. How far that will go, whether we'll go into trance and whether we'll go into all those aspects of, that's another, or whether that, I think there are places where we still will draw the line, because you can't adopt the entire culture. You have to be true to yourself as well as the music that you're playing. But working out where that line is and of course the line moves in Bali as well. This is the thing. You can't say that. We live in this, as I was saying before, we live in this sort of world of multicultural. There's a wonderful thing. I just saw it on television yesterday. So somebody, it's a quote. I think it might be Una King or somebody saying there's no such thing, really. We didn't say as growing up that this is that great multicultural experiment. You just live with the people that you live with, and this is the world we live in, and the world we live in is one where people in London play gamelan, and people in Bali play violin. And that's the world that we now inhabit. So, the lines of what's what's right for one community and what's right for another community. It's a fluid thing, and I think that's the thing that's extraordinarily. That's the thing that's changed in my time of playing gamelan, is that I now live in a Great Britain where there are hundreds and hundreds of people playing gamelan. When I started, there were probably 50 people playing gamelan. There were 4 gamelans, and a handful of people who had any interest in doing it, or who knew that they had an interest. Whereas now it's a. You say you play gamelan, they go, oh yeah, you're one of those people who play gamelan. It's not this what's that?
Yeah.
You don't get that anymore.
Yeah.
Very rarely. And it's not unusual. And there are people who do samba, and there are people who do African drumming, and there are people... And so to do one of these things is not considered in any way unusual now. Whereas when I started, it was odd. It was a bit of an eccentric thing. Oh, he plays odd music, he's quite interested in other sort of cultures, and it's a bit strange. Even in my lifetime, that's what it was like. So